Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. This is Beth Johnson with JBS International. Thank you again for joining today's webinar, Taming Tough Emotions, How Supervisors and Colleagues Can Respond to Difficult Times. Before we begin, we'd like to review some housekeeping items. Please note all participant lines will be muted upon entry and for the duration of the webinar session. But we want to hear from you, and presenters will pause at the close of each section of the presentation to respond to comments or questions. We encourage you to please submit them at any time by using the chat feature. To open your chat window, please click on the chat icon located in the bottom center of your Zoom toolbar window. If you experience any technical issues during the webinar, please message us using the chat feature, which is located at the bottom center of your screen, or email us at ovc-tta@jbsinternational.com. Today's webinar is being recorded for sharing. The recording and presentation slides, along with other resources, will be available in the coming weeks. Today's webinar provides 2 continuing education credit hours from the National Board of Certified Counselors and the Association for Addiction Professionals. If you are interested in receiving CEUs, please email your name and email address to the email on the screen, ovc-tta@jbsinternational.com, and a certificate will be emailed to you within the coming weeks. Next slide, please. Today's presenter is Jennie Cole-Mossman, Technical Expert Lead with JBS International. Ms. Mossman is a mental health specialist whose expertise spans child-parent relationships, family drug courts, opioid and other drug use disorders, and trauma screening for young children ages 0 to 3. She brings a special expertise to serving the youngest children who are victims of opioid-related crimes. Ms. Mossman has served as co-director of the Nebraska Resource Project for Vulnerable Young Children at the Center on Children, Families, and the Law, the University of Nebraska, for the past 5 years. Earlier, she led the Safe Start Project for Young Children. She conducts extensive training and provides TTA to strengthen relationships between providers of children's trauma services and drug courts, with a focus on increasing trauma care for infants and toddlers. Jennie, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you all for joining today. I put these 2 images up here. You know, most of you are already working in fields that really require you to deal with difficult emotions. So you serve victims of crime, their families, the most vulnerable people. And now you've been asked to do that in a very strange and sometimes scary situation, while you're also caring for the well-being of your own children, if you have them, parents and friends, and you're being asked to do it without a lot of the supports you've come to rely on. So those short conversations you may have had in the hallway, meeting colleagues for lunch, going to the gym after a hard day, many of your traditional coping mechanisms have been stripped away, or they've been changed into something that's kind of unfamiliar. So today, I am hopeful that we can help you remember what you can do. We focus a lot of times on all the things that have changed and the things that we can't do, but today we're going to try and focus on the things that we can do. And some of these things you might already do, you might do them frequently. If so, I'm so glad, and I hope this is a reminder and makes you feel good about the toolbox that you have, or perhaps it'll make you be more intentional about doing some of those things, or bring you something new to this kind of strange new tool belt that you're wearing as you take care of your staff, your colleagues, yourself, and your families. Next slide. I just wanted to put a slide in here of gratitude and credit that's due. So as Beth mentioned in my introduction, I used to work at the Center on Children, Families, and the Law at the University of Nebraska. And with the help of the Erickson Institute, which is where most of the content that you'll be seeing today comes from, and Dr. Linda Gilkerson, at the Nebraska Resource Project, we were able to start the Nebraska Center on Reflective Practice. And we're serving and doing training for many professionals in this model of supervision and consultation that we're going to talk a little bit about today, for child welfare workers, for judges, for attorneys, for CASAs, for our Office of Public Guardian and therapists. We did a lot of training with the help of the Erickson Institute's model. And then I also wanted to thank OVC and JBS for allowing me an opportunity to share this with you all today. This is near and dear to my heart. I love this content, and it seems particularly relevant for what's going on with all of us today. So what we will be talking about today, just my disclaimer to you, is not the full training. Traditionally, when I did this training, I had 2 full days in person with a smaller group of people. And then I got to do 6 months of individual mentoring with them and then another full day of training. So no problem packing into 2 hours and by webinar, a lot of this content. So if you're interested, there'll be a slide afterwards. If this is something that really seems to fit for you and it makes a lot of sense and you want to learn more, feel free to email me afterwards and I can help put you in touch with someone at the Erickson Institute. So next slide. Today's webinar is somewhat experiential as much as it can be. It's also feeling a little experimental because we have a lot of people on. My plan originally was to use the chat box. Since we can't be together to talk and feel each other's presence and have that connection, we'll have to use the chat box to connect. And so there will be multiple times throughout where I ask you to type things in the chat or for us to practice some of the mindfulness that we'll be talking about as we go through. The chat box is not just for me to see, but hopefully for you to see your colleagues all across the country that are on this webinar and kind of see where they're at. And I think you will see that a lot of you are in the same place and have some of the same ideas and hopefully pick up some new ideas from things that you see there. So please do participate. 2 hours can be a really long time to just listen to my voice go on and on. So we're going to start with practicing some presence. So much of what we discussed today is going to be an attempt to help us stay present with others while they experience difficult emotions. And we may do this typically, but we have this new challenge because many of us may relate too well or have our own emotions to tend to with things going on with stay-at-home orders or people that are sick or people that we're worried about. So we're going to begin today by feeding ourselves because we know the old adage, you cannot pour from an empty cup. So I'm going to invite you to tune out the distractions the best you can. I just heard my dog barking. All my kids are home. I'm sure many of you are in the same boat as I am. But if you can, to try to find a quiet space, if it's possible, to put your cell phone away and close your door or put in some headphones. And we'll begin practicing what we preach with a short mindfulness exercise. So I'll invite you to get comfortable in your chair and place both feet on the ground. Ground yourself into the earth just a little bit. You may either close your eyes or you can have a soft downward gaze, whatever's most comfortable. And we begin by just noticing our breath. Feeling it come into our lungs. Feeling the temperature. How forceful. And then feeling it leave our bodies, either through our nose or our mouth. Perhaps it's warmer than when you drew it in. Maybe your exhale is more forceful than your inhale. But just notice your breath just as it is, with no attempt to change it. As you do this, you're going to hear sounds, and you'll have thoughts that come in and out of your mind. Just let them roll in and roll out like a tide. Let them come in and then go back out. Practicing meditation and mindfulness means we are always in practice, never perfect. So we're just breathing and noticing sensations in our bodies. We will begin to elongate our breath for a minute, beginning by breathing in, filling up our belly with air, drawing it up into our heart and lungs, feeling it move into your back body until you're completely full, and we pause. Then letting that breath slowly leave, first through your nose or mouth, letting go in your back body, leaving your lungs, and finally drawing in your belly until it's all gone. And then we fill them up again, up through the belly, into your lungs and back, pausing and letting go, gently, slowly, letting the air seep out. We begin to notice this new breath, the sensation shifting, being rooted in our seats, and feeling the tension leave us just as the breath does. We'll continue by taking 2 more breaths on our own, just noticing the shifts, however subtle, being an observer, letting everything else roll in and out like the tide. And now we begin to come back to awareness. We wiggle our fingers or our toes. We open our eyes if they aren't open. We allow ourselves to shift back into focus, free from whatever distracts us, and ready and present to absorb what is in front of us. Okay, next slide. I like us to start with a little bit of mindfulness, and I like us to practice some of these things throughout, just so we can kind of get a feel for the state that we would like to be in when we're actually doing some of this work. What you have in front of you is one of the iterations of the FAN, or Facilitating Attuned Interactions, that was created by Dr. Linda Gilkerson at the Erickson Institute. And what you see is a conceptual model that also comes with a set of tools. We are going to talk about 2 of the core processes. So each one of those little wedges that you see that starts with calming, feeling, thinking, doing, and reflecting, those are core processes that normally during training we would talk about all of those. Today we're going to focus on mindful self-regulation, or helping to find calm, and empathic inquiry, or dealing with feelings. So those are the 2 processes that really we need to have for us to move on to effective thinking or doing or reflecting. So some of this will click right away for you, and some people are very visual and they look at this diagram and it makes a whole lot of sense. When I first learned the fan, it took me a long time, and I always said it's kind of like one of those pictures that when you look at it one way, it looks like an old woman, and when you look at it the other way, it looks like a vase. Like once you see it and know it, you can't unsee it. So if the diagram isn't particularly helpful to you, that's okay today. We'll get to the tools in a little bit. You'll see there's some arrows down at the bottom. These are the things that we hope to be kind of the fruits of when we use this method to do consultation or supervision. I'm going to use those things interchangeably, but really what we're talking about is in human interactions, how do we help keep ourselves calm and bring that calm to other people? And how do we provide this empathic inquiry? How do we help them contain feelings that they might be having, whether that's your supervisee or your colleague or your friend? What we hope is that through the use of this, we have increased confidence and competence. We hope that we're building reflective capacity so that many people that I did consultation with the FAN would find that they would be able to walk through this a little bit on their own because they were able to gain that observer perspective of what was going on with them. And then lastly, we hope that we strengthen program quality. So we hope that we use the FAN to help ourselves to regulate and then in turn being able to make better decisions and better plans that fit the needs of our program. What you see in the middle, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in just a second, are the things that we all balance. So depending on the group that I was doing consultation for, those bubbles might change, but you see that there's the consultee or the supervisees, concern, the consultant's concern, or that would be the supervisor's concern. And then there's this context. So there's program expectations and equilibrium. So in any interaction we're having with people, both people might have concerns, and then there might be some context that we are constantly having to juggle. Next slide. So we're constantly having to manage this middle. So effective supervision or consultation involves managing the concerns of the supervisor, the supervisee, and thinking about program expectations. And this becomes particularly difficult when there's crisis and uncertainty. So if you try to bring these things in balance, we think about also what might it look like when they're out of balance. So when a supervisor's concerns are the only thing in the room, our supervisee might feel dismissed or unheard. Or when we don't pay attention to the context of program expectations or systems, we might miss important steps in planning, and there might be misunderstandings. Or if we tend only to the supervisee, there may be other issues related to serving clients or the organization at large that are being missed. So really thinking about these three things in the middle and trying to not let one get so large that it overshadows the next. Next slide. So we'll have two core processes that we discussed today. And the first one is mindful self-regulation. And this is where we go when we feel out of balance. We have to balance ourselves before we can balance others. We run into what we call it the FAN mismatches all the time at home and at work, things that kind of get you wound up and make it difficult for you to stay present. So mindful self-regulation helps us read our own cues. And we all have these strategies that we use to bring ourselves back into balance and bring us back into the present. Next slide. And the other we'll be talking about is feelings or empathic inquiry. No matter how hard we try to keep our feelings out of our work, they're present. We'll explore some of these strategies about listening with acceptance, holding, validating, and exploring and containing feelings. But really the fan uses this as a place where we can meet people here and try to help provide them with what they need and then help them move on. Being a supportive colleague or a good supervisor means that you're able to balance your own feelings and attend to the needs of others. That's much, much easier said than done, especially in this time where we may be experiencing some similar things to the clients that we are working with. Next slide. So if we were working with the entire fan, we'd be talking a lot about reading cues and knowing how we know where to meet people. The fan is about meeting people where they're at, about which core process they might be in, and it's not linear. So again, people that love conceptual tools, when you looked at this, I'm sure you read it from left to right, and wouldn't it be wonderful if that's how all of our conversations with colleagues and supervisors went? We got calm, we asked them about their feelings, that got calmed down, they thought well, they came up with a plan, and then they were able to reflect upon it and take it into their work. But we all know that that's not really how things happen. There are times, I used to use this with clinic students at the law school, and they would come in oftentimes in that thinking. So their cue to me was they were calm and they were ready to figure out an issue. If I had tried to talk to them about their feelings, that would have been a mismatch. That wouldn't have been what they needed in that moment. So we aren't going to be able to cover all of these, but I just wanted you to take a look at some of the cues for knowing where people might be at. I pay particular attention to the first two. So the first core process as a fan is knowing when you are dysregulated and out of balance. The rest as a fan really attends to where other people are at and meeting them there. But this first core process has us checking ourselves and figuring out where are we and what do we need to do to bring ourselves back into balance. The feeling or the empathic inquiry core process cues for us to know that this is where someone is at is when the other person shows strong emotions, which usually is pretty clear to us, is dysregulated, or sometimes people seem checked out and disinterested. And that cue is a little bit harder to pick up on. But thinking about those two things as cues when we know that we are going to have to use mindful self-regulation or that empathic inquiry. All right, next slide. And I'm going to just set up the video a little bit. So I want you to watch this video knowing what you know with the limited amount of information about the fan, and think about where these two people are. You're going to see a couple having a conversation and thinking about, are they in their feelings or are they thinking clearly and ready for solutions? Where do you think that they are? And then afterwards, we're going to use the chat box a little bit. So go ahead and play the video.
It's just, there's no pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It's not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing.
You always do this. You always try to fix things, and what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
Okay. Thank you. Ow!
Come on, if you would just
Don't.
So this is where it's so hard when you're not a live audience, because I tend to enjoy sarcasm a lot. And this video is usually where people are leaning over and whispering to each other that they're going to show it to their partner when they get home, because it resonates with people. And even though it's kind of a silly video, thinking about where is she, if we think in terms of this conceptual model, and we think, is she really in her feelings, or is she thinking and wanting solutions? If you would type in the chat where you think she is to begin with. Almost everybody is able to identify she's in her feelings. And what we see is he responds initially by giving her solutions, which is not empathic inquiry. That's thinking, right? And you see the mismatch. You see that she feels hurt, unheard. You see that it's not helping her in that moment. And then he does a pretty simple thing, although reluctantly, and maybe not as genuinely as we would like, where he simply validates her feelings and listens. And you see a shift in her, and you see her feelings start to de-escalate a little bit. I like to use this video because sometimes when I show you the fan, people feel like it's hard to understand that conceptual model, but we've been talking about it for less than 30 minutes, and you're already able to identify this, because these are probably things that you do and identify and read cues all the time. This is just put into a conceptual model for you. So go ahead and next slide. So really what the fan is about is attunement. The core processes are all based upon this theory of attunement. When we connect and feel understood, we're attuned. And this emotional containment that we might be seeking, it asks us to notice an emotion and then connect to it so that we are attuned to the other. Next slide. So this power of feeling understood, when someone feels truly understood, truly known, the attunement that occurs creates a space where it is possible to try new ways of interacting. Attunement is really powerful. If you can think of a time when you have felt this truly known and understood, it provides that sense of safety, which is really what we want to convey to colleagues now and to staff, so that they can in turn pass this on to those that you're serving. So supervisors, for example, that can accept someone not knowing and be there and understand that feeling might be able to help someone open up a new space instead of becoming defensive. Next slide. And attunement also is about this concept of match and mismatch that we talked about briefly before. But when we're in attunement or we're matching, interactions just seem to flow. You've probably had a lot of conversations like this where you just feel like time flies and somebody really gets you and supervision, and you feel known and you feel safe and you feel like you'd like that conversation to continue forever. And then we've all had those conversations where we're not in attunement and interactions are very difficult, they're fractured, or misunderstanding is happening. So if we think in terms of the fan, usually when we are in attunement, it's because we're in the same core process. So I have recognized as a supervisor or a friend or a colleague that someone is in feelings and I meet them there. Instead of trying to talk to them about what they should do or give them a plan, I'm able to meet them there and I'm calm as well. This is a lot easier said than done. It's a lot easier with certain people than others. But the good news is, you know, one of the things we know, and those of you, I don't know how many of you have done Circle of Security Parenting, but infant mental health research tells us in the healthiest of relationships, attunement happens about 30% of the time. So like you can be the world's okayest parent or the world's okayest supervisor, as long as you can spend time in this repair. So the rest of time is spent in rupture and repair. Most of the time, things aren't flowing exactly right, and we have to recalibrate. So this rupture and repair means that we notice something isn't right. We aren't connecting with our colleague. They come in and they're dysregulated, and we're going to tell them what to do. And then we have to recalibrate. And we realize that maybe they just need to talk about how they're feeling. And we might have to offer some kind of acknowledgement that we were just trying to fix things and we need to back up. Next slide. So the FAN asks us to be conscious about attunement. We have to learn to read adult cues. And many of us know how to do this already. We have to be intentional about it. We do it with our clients. We do it with people that we serve all the time. We certainly talk to parents about giving this to children, and we try to give it to our own children so that we can help be in that attuned state. And we attune to their internal state often. We know that when clients come in and they're angry and they're yelling at us, that oftentimes there's hurt beneath that, and we can tolerate that. But thinking about being conscious of this with the people that we work with and that we supervise as well. So we don't outgrow the need for attunement. It always feels good when people understand you and you feel like you're heard and you feel like that's a safe space. So we hope then that we can engage in a way that reflects this understanding. Again, to meet people where they're at. We hear that all the time in human services, and it wasn't until I started using the FAN that I could say, and this is exactly how you do it. This is how you meet people where they're at. You notice, you strive for that attunement. If you mess it up, you recalibrate. And those repairs are just an accepted part of the process. They strengthen relationships and people's capacity to notice and respond builds. Next slide. So we're going to dive deep into these, or kind of deep as we can get, into these first two core processes. And this is the supervisor FAN. So you'll see the bubbles are different in the middle. Again, depending on who I was working with, those bubbles might have changed. So if I was working with judges or lawyers, the program expectations was often the law, and then there would be them and their client's concern. So thinking about those three bubbles, just again, as the three things that you're holding. And the first core process, this mindful self-regulation, what we seek from it is what's on the outside of the FAN. We seek to calm. So let's go to the next slide. And this is where we begin to talk about mindfulness. And I am sure that there is a lot of you that have a lot of experience with mindfulness, whether in your personal life or your professional life. But really, this is being fully in the present. It is connecting deeply and directly to what is happening without becoming it. So to feel what others are feeling, but not become it. That's a lot more difficult than it sounds. It's how we acknowledge these feelings without becoming them. Next slide. So it helps us stay in balance so that we can be fully present. We want the supervisor to be able to maintain a reflective posture. We want them to be present so they can listen and read cues and move flexibly if there's some rupture and repair. But there are times, supervisors and colleagues, and when we're talking with friends, we're all human, and we get dysregulated and we get thrown off balance. that's our cue that we need to go to mindful self-regulation. And if we had the full 2 days, we would spend a lot of time exploring how we read our own cues so that we know if we need to go there. But if you would just chat in the box some of the ways that you know that you become dysregulated. Where is it in your body, or what is it you do? I have a very clear one. My shoulders, when my shoulders start to get tight and come up around my ears, I know I'm getting dysregulated. I also used to sit in the back of a lot of courtrooms, and everybody knew when I would scoot towards the end of the seat that I was kind of dysregulated and I thought I needed to say something. Good. Fidgeting, heart racing, flushing. Oh yeah, my cheeks flush too when I do public speaking. Getting a headache, clenching your teeth, twitching your eye. So you guys know what this is. Like, you can feel it in you. That's great. Thank you for putting those up. And I hope you guys are watching the chat too. Again, I think in this time where we all are disconnected, feeling this connectedness, because I'm reading all these and thinking, oh my gosh, those are just all things that I do. So let's go to the next slide. So being able to connect, what is it that gets us stirred up? So there are certain things that almost always create that kind of dysregulation in us as a supervisor or just as a human being. I put some of them up there. Thinking about these situations, are there things that always get you stirred up, that always get you dysregulated? So if you would put some of those in the chat box as we're talking to you, I think that would be great. You know, mine is particularly when someone is being picked on. It just is like my nuclear button. Like, I had a meeting one time and we were all brainstorming things and sharing ideas, and this person kept shutting this other person down, and there was a great big power differential. And I definitely noticed all those things that you all were putting in the chat box. I was on the edge of my chair. I was getting defensive. My heart was racing, and I was totally out of balance. So someone asked, this would be for the supervisor, but it could be for the supervisee too, because this could happen with your clients. When I was a young therapist, I used to hate when people would say I didn't have any kids, and now I feel like such a big dummy because I realized that I really was being defensive about that, and that it really did matter. My experiences did matter. So yeah, there are things that really push your button and they really get you stirred up, whether you're working with clients. They're probably, if you're staying at home with people, are things that people at home really get you stirred up. My kids know that lying to me is a huge one. I saw someone put that up there. So I also hate when my kids take off their leggings and all of their socks and everything are in there in the laundry, and that drives me crazy. So some of those things are just little things that might get you stirred up, but they happen all over. They happen in the context of supervision. Thank you for sharing those. So let's go to the next slide. Now, if we were in person, I would be giving you all a glitter bottle right now, and we'd be able to shake up that glitter bottle and look at what happens. Because when we get stirred up, we can't see things clearly. When we get dysregulated, when someone pushes that button and I'm scooting to the end of my seat and I'm starting to think about, oh, I hate it when people do this and what's going on. When that happens, it's like all that glitter or whatever this is in these cups is there, and we can't see clearly. And mindful self-regulation is what helps us get settled. It helps bring clarity because it brings us back to the present moment. When I'm thinking about myself and what's going on with me and how I feel about things, I can't possibly tend to and listen to the person in front of me. So I have to use that mindful self-regulation, but first I have to be aware of it. Next slide. These mindful self-regulation strategies help you go from reaction to response. Mindfulness in general helps us do this. So if our mind is calm and clear, you can see what the other person needs from you and provide it instead of reacting. It's that moment between reaction and response is where we insert that mindful self-regulation strategy. Next slide. And we do that through these ABCs. We've already talked a little bit about awareness, and everybody is able to, as far as I can tell by the chat, you know what gets you stirred up and you know what your body feels like, but sometimes we dismiss these cues. So really awareness is becoming aware of those reactions, both our thoughts and our feelings and our body sensations, and not dismissing them. So I don't know about you all, but I dismiss those cues sometimes because I think, well, I can handle all of this. My training allows me to not get upset by these things, or I don't have time to take a deep breath today. I need to things are too important. I get this sense of urgency. So thinking about not only do we have to become aware, but we have to tend to it and decide at that moment that we're going to use one of those strategies to come back into balance. So ultimately, the goal is for you to notice those things, discern, are they taking over my ability to be present? Choose some kind of strategy that we can do, and then reconnect and connect with a new awareness. So this beginning tool, none of the rest of the fan works unless we can do these ABCs of mindful self-regulation. Next slide. So we'll go over briefly some of these, and I invite you, as we're going over them, I'm going to try to save the chat too, and I forgot to say this at the beginning. If you have questions and I don't get to them, I'm going to try to save the chat so that I can get back to you later on. But in thinking about what are some common and typical mindful self-regulation strategies, and we probably all know a lot of them and maybe don't use them quite as often as we probably should. Breathing is a real common strategy. So we did a little bit of conscious breathing at the beginning during our meditation, but it could be that simple, taking 3 deep breaths where you're noticing your breathing. Lots of people like the metered breathing, the 4-square breathing, where you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4 breaths. I incorporated a little bit of the balloon or the belly breathing into the initial meditation that we did. But you might have other breathing strategies that you use. So if you have a great one, type it in so we can all share it and use it. Counting down from 10, it's a good one. Grounding is another strategy. So there's a picture. The fan is used to train physicians who have a high degree of stress. And the picture here is of a physician who uses grounding and mindful walking. So in between patients, which just takes a couple of minutes, really being intentional about walking and feeling, my foot is on the floor, my heel, my toe, instead of thinking of the 10,000 other things that are going on. Other grounding strategies that you may have used or even have taught your clients or people is the noticing 4 things you can see, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell or taste or touch. So just really bringing yourself back to that present moment. And you may have some other grounding strategies. I used to really like with kids I worked with, my feet are on the floor, and my feet are connected to the floor. My feet are connected to my ankles are connected to my legs. Just really anything that can bring them into that present moment. Next slide. Self-talk is a real common strategy that people use, sometimes intentionally or unintentionally. And, you know, we know self-talk can be good or bad. So positive self-talk that helps us bring ourselves back into balance. So there's a picture of a little card that says stay. We had a home visitor using the fan that just had stay on the back of her ID card. So she would look at that before she went into a visit, or when the visit got particularly tense and she noticed that, she would look there. Other phrases, my favorite one that I use all the time because sometimes things seem overwhelming is, I care and I cannot prevent all the suffering, because I need that reminder. If you have other short self-talks that you use, if you would type them in now to the chat feature, that would be great. Feel it, don't be it is another one of my favorites. I love you and I'm proud of you. That someone just typed. Some of those can be really helpful. Let it go, game face on, challenge accepted. I have on my desk right now a big sticky note that says a relationship cannot be manualized. It's one I used to use all the time. I was also a child parent psychotherapy trainer, and I have that one on my desk all the time. Every day is a new day. So being intentional about this self-talk and incorporating it into some of these strategies. The next one is imagery. So one of the clinicians we trained in the fan often would kind of get rigid and tense in their thinking when they got dysregulated. And so they would have this image in their mind of a wheat field, which was open and flexible and flowing. Another one used the image of putting herself into low gear, so shifting herself down. I had several judges that we incorporated their mindful self-regulation strategies onto a sticky note that just were on the bench. And one of them was, stay just a little longer, listen a little longer, take a breath before you speak. So thinking about those things that you want to do intentionally. All right, next slide. Sensory grounding is another one. Using a favorite scent, sound, or feel something consciously is an intentional regulation strategy. My partner that used to train this with me at my old job, she always liked lavender, so she had one of those lava rock bracelets and she could smell lavender all the time. I love the smell of coffee. It's some association that is made after many, many years of doing therapy. I love the smell of coffee, and I can feel a shift in my body when I smell coffee. So you might have a smell or some kind of lotion. Sometimes tapping is pretty popular now to do some sensory grounding. So just take 1 minute and find a little scrap of paper and write down 2 regulation strategies that you either already do and you're going to commit to being more conscious about doing in these times, or 2 that you want to try. All right, Rox, we can go to the next slide. This is my favorite slide in all of FAN training, and probably because it is something I really needed to learn. Mindful self-regulation and these strategies work best when we use them regularly instead of using them when our threshold is breached. So this is a continuum of regulation. And if you think about your day, you come into the office and maybe you are mostly regulated. Maybe you haven't had like a crazy morning, or maybe it's like now where you're at home and there's some dysregulation because you got out of bed and you've got to start homeschool, and your dog went to the bathroom on the floor. I'm thinking of my mornings actually, and you're just real close to that threshold being breached. And using a mindful self-regulation strategy then is helpful. It's much more helpful if it's regularly practiced when you're at a 1 or a 2 or a 3. Oftentimes, and for those of you who have clients, they often try regulation strategies when they're at a 10, and then they come back to you and say, that didn't work. Deep breathing doesn't work for me, because they were already at a 10. That threshold was breached, and they kind of reached the absolute point where they just were having a really hard time doing regulation on their own. So when we talk about these mindful self-regulation strategies, we're again talking about a practice. For me, meditation is a daily thing that I do so that my threshold isn't breached or is breached less often. But I will tell you that up until the last probably 9 months, for 5 years every night, I had a timer that went off on my phone at 8:45 that said I should meditate, and I ignored it. So these things seem like really simple concepts, but fitting them into our daily lives and making sure that we do them is difficult. We have a lot of things, and we oftentimes don't want to use them until we absolutely need to. But I notice a big shift in where my threshold is. My threshold is a lot higher now that I just do that one simple practice. So don't wait until you're a 10. Don't wait until the 4th person has called you and needed supervision and things are blowing up. Be doing those things when you're relatively calm and keeping your cup full. So with that, next slide. We're going to take 2 minutes for you to shift away from your screen, because we have been, this timing is working out really perfectly, not because I practiced, but just because of good luck. We've been on this webinar for about an hour, and our attention is going to start to wane. So just do one of those short regulation strategies on your own. You can stand up and move around, stretch, take a couple deep breaths. Do something to help replenish your attention so that we can move on and talk about empathic inquiry. Okay. 2 minutes feels like a really long time when you're presenting a webinar. So let's bring our attention back now, and we'll go to the next slide. And we're really going to focus on that empathic inquiry. So assuming that we're able to get calm for ourselves so that we can do that for other people, we might have people that we're supervising, or our colleagues, or your clients, or your friends, that we can clearly see from those cues that they are in their feelings, as we say, that they are having some pretty intense feelings. They've either verbalized that or they've not verbalized that, but we notice that. In the chat box, what are some of the feelings that are walking into your agencies right now, or the feelings that you're dealing with in supervision or when working with your colleagues? Anxiety, uncertainty. Fear that we'll have to come back to returning to doing therapy in the community, frustration, anger, disconnection from the team, hopelessness, overstimulation, for sure, frustrations, disconnection, exhaustion, oh my gosh, wearing a mask all day, overwhelmed, lack of focus, large workload. All of these feelings that are coming through your door make it really difficult for you to provide the services, to think creatively, you know, to manage your own stress level and have anything left over at the end of the day. And so we want to focus on some strategies that we can use to try to help to contain this. Now, I will be real honest with you, just like mindful self-regulation, none of it's like a magic bullet, and sometimes you're still going to have that threshold breached, but it helps. There are going to be times where you meet people in empathic inquiry and do all of the right things, and they still are going to have some pretty intense feelings. So it could be the entirety of your supervision visit that you are in this with people, or your conversation. It could be 10 minutes of it. It just really depends on the situation. So these are strategies that we hope can help. Next slide. It's my favorite, one of my favorite memes ever. I used to train a lot of attorneys in the FAN to do client counseling and judges, and they really had a hard time with feelings. This was a scary thing for them, but humor seemed to be the way that we could get at it. But, you know, feelings are a part of life, and they're part of how we know ourselves, and they really do give us valuable information. Next. But they can be scary. We can feel disoriented and overwhelmed when other people have big feelings. You can tell I used to see kids. And we might worry, a lot of us, even if we know better, we worry if we talk about those feelings, they might get worse or they might get too big. So there are some people who are very comfortable being in this core process. They like talking about feelings. They feel confident. And there are other people that will say that they don't do feelings. I had a lot of my legal community that said that they didn't have feelings about things. I also had a lot of therapists that told me that they didn't have feelings about things. But they do, they actually have them. They're just choosing to avoid, compartmentalize, or deny those feelings. And what we often found was, especially when we were talking with our legal community and some child welfare and actually therapists, ethical complaints often happened when we didn't tend to our feelings and we weren't honest about what was going on with clients. And then we either said or did something that we really regretted. It was a reaction that we wished had been a response. Next slide. This expressing of emotions is different for individuals. So we often have these explicit rules about feelings that we have at our workplaces, or we have implicit rules that you just know because that's the culture of your office. We have different cultures that have different ways of expressing feelings. We have different rules about the intensity or the type of feelings that are okay to show. We might have family of origin or attachment that tells us what's okay and what's not okay for feelings. So some of us are real comfortable with certain feelings as well. So some people are very comfortable. I am very comfortable talking with people who are angry and grieving. I am very uncomfortable with people who don't care about anything or are showing ambivalence. That's difficult for me. You all probably have certain feelings that are easy for you to explore and talk about in supervision, and other ones not so much. And some of that comes, we might have some rules from our professions. You know, our disciplinary training might tell us things. So mental health professionals might be very comfortable talking about other people's feelings, but then when they come to you for supervision, I found that that was one of the hardest groups, because what they had learned in their professional training was, you know, you put it away. You don't have feelings about your clients and what's going on. You put that away. And I'm so glad there's a shift in this movement toward reflective supervision, where people can start to acknowledge that you do have them, how you express them, and how you make sure you take care of those so that it doesn't impact your clients negatively is what the focus is on. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. I had a chat in there. Go back one slide. Are there rules that you have in your organization, whether explicit or implicit, that you're comfortable sharing about feelings and how they're expressed or where they're expressed? If you wouldn't mind sharing them in the chat. You need to be neutral. Ours was sarcasm at my old job. We just used sarcasm all the time. Like nobody did it without sarcasm. Yeah, not good at asking for help for themselves. Self-care at all times. That's a great culture. Be respectful. Good. Thanks for sharing some of those. Okay, next slide. Be empathic. I love seeing all these come in. I wish we were all in the same room, because I really love doing this training live. But I really appreciate all of you using the chat box, because it makes me feel a little less disconnected to all of you. So we have to remind ourselves that emotions are okay. It's normal to have strong feelings. It's really normal to have strong feelings about what's going on right now in your organizations, in your communities, and that feelings can be expressed, they can be shared, they can be thought about, and feelings can be tolerated. There are a lot of our clients, or a lot of us, who grew up in families where feelings were not tolerated. So sometimes that's a revelation to people. Is that feelings can be tolerated. Emotions give us important information about what to do next. And the last bullet on there is that emotions are shared by another in similar situations. I think someone just chatted in, is it normal for people to be scared right now? I saw a lot of that when people were talking about things that they felt. And that is one of the things, using the FAN in consultation or supervision in groups, or even just with a couple of supervisees, almost everybody commented that when they were able to express those feelings during empathic inquiry, when they had that opportunity, knowing they weren't alone was a great comfort to them. So, all right, next slide. So you all knew that there'd be a little Brene Brown in here, right? Because that's all about the feelings. So we're gonna watch a short video about empathy and sympathy, and a lot of you may have seen it. I've watched this video like 125 times because of training, and I still love it every time.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, woo, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. I had it, yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Can you go back one slide and just like pause it there so we can talk? Like I said, I've watched this so many times, and normally we're able to have this nice, robust discussion about what stands out for you. But if you're so inclined, feel free to put those things in the chat box. What stands out for me always, and is always a gut punch to me, is the silver lining, because I know I do it. I still do it. Like, watch the video 125 times and I still do it. It really is hard because we worry about what we're going to say. Someone's takeaway kind of was, how do you keep empathy from coming across as pity? It's a really hard distinction in there. And the first thing I think about with this is those cues to go to mindful self-regulation, because empathy, if you heard at the end, requiring us to connect to our own feelings that might be uncomfortable, that requires us then to go to mindful self-regulation sometimes to get ourselves calm again so that we can feel that connection. And And then really, when she says, rarely can a statement make it better, but connection can, I think about the difficulty we all have right now with connecting with other people and really genuinely being there with them and their feelings and holding those feelings when we're on a computer screen or we're on a telephone or we're on a text. Just it makes things much, much more difficult. So I'm going to try to adapt some of the strategies as we go through, but just thinking about that video and thinking about how can we create connection instead of, you know, disconnecting from that. And that's what I think of more with sympathy, is you're disconnected from the feelings, but empathy, we're connected to the feelings, we're plugged in and we're there. Okay, next slide. Someone asked how you maintain professionalism when being empathetic, and I hope that some of these strategies will help you think about that. But my initial thought is mindful self-regulation, mindful self-regulation, mindful self-regulation. So being calm really allows us to get calm and make good decisions about what that empathy is going to look like. So we use empathic inquiry in terms of the FAN to validate the other person's reality. It aids in emotional regulation, which we really need for people to be able to shift into productive thought or action. So in order for people to think through a problem or get to a place where they're going to do something, we have to help them get those feelings at least in a manageable way. And we want to acknowledge feelings so that they inhibit impulsive reactions. Like I said, many of my consultation groups, oftentimes when people had an ethical complaint or an HR complaint, there had been some pretty big feelings and they had done something fairly impulsive that they wish that they hadn't said or did because they were having a lot of feelings. So in thinking about how you can help your supervisees to prevent that and in yourself. And empathic inquiry fosters relationship and builds trust. And that creates that space in supervision or with our colleagues for us to try new things and to get that support. Next slide. It is hard to stay with feelings though. All of these things, much like when I used to do therapy, you know, there are a lot of things that the concept is really simple. So like planned ignoring, or what used to be called like timeout, is a really simple concept until you have a small child and you're trying to do that with them. The same is using mindful self-regulation is harder until you're actually having to do it. And same with staying with feelings. So when presented with intense emotions and that uncertainty, and we all were talking about that uncertainty, people have a tendency to move away from them, and they do it in different ways. My favorite, my personal favorite, which I hate about myself, but is I get all activated and then I'm going to fix it for you. And if we had the time to spend doing the whole FAN training, we talk about the fix it train. And my friend Jamie and I used to say, like, I am the engineer of the fix it train. I'm going to, you know, tell you how to make things better. And usually from people, that's coming from a good place. They are revved up and they want to help. But it doesn't feel great for other people to be told what they need to do when they're in feelings. That's a mismatch because that person is in their feelings and I'm asking them to think. Other times when people are faced with really emotional situations, we get emotional ourselves and kind of rev up, or we tune out. So the revving up, the difference I used to always say between the FAN and venting is this empathic inquiry and the other core processes don't allow us to do this. Revving up is like I go into my colleague's office and I tell her about something that someone else did and it was terrible. And I'm really having a lot of feelings. But instead of that person acknowledging my feelings, they say, yeah, I hate her too. And pretty soon we are like off you know, we're gossiping about her, we're talking about all the things we hate about her. And all I've done is what we called it at our old office was slimed the other person. So I've like come in and I've given them all of this emotional energy, but neither one of us feels any better afterwards because neither one of us has really been heard and been able to kind of down-regulate and think through that. Sometimes we try to over-explain or talk or reassure. It's that silver lining that she talked about. So when people do these things, they often don't have bad intentions, but supervisees or colleagues might feel dismissed. They might feel incompetent. If you remember on the big fan, one of the things we want to do is increase people's competence. But if someone's coming to you and saying, I'm really confused about this situation, and you're always giving them the answer, the message might be, you can't figure this out on your own. They might think you don't trust them, or they might feel like you just don't understand the work. So in order to stay with those feelings, we have to use mindful self-regulation and get ourselves calm first. So we cannot enter into empathic inquiry with people if we are not calm ourselves. Okay, next slide. And finally, the tools. So in fan training, if we were doing this, this would have taken a lot longer to get to the tools, but we're going to talk about these strategies for holding, validating, exploring, and containing feelings. And there's two pictures up there because oftentimes when we talk about feelings, we're talking about the couple that looks unhappy and how we hold, validate, explore feelings that are negative. But we want to keep in mind that there are good feelings. There is joy, there is happiness, and that those things, that pride or that excitement, those are things that we also need to validate and sometimes explore and remind our supervisees of those times when things were really, really, really exciting and they were successful and what that felt like for them. So we don't always need to be in empathic inquiry when people have negative feelings. And if you think of in terms of people meeting you where you're at, you know, if someone pops into my office and is telling me, I think I did a great job on this, you know, this is what was happening and I feel so good about it, I can meet them there and say, great, I want to hear more about it. Tell me what that was like for you. Or I can have a mismatch with them and say, well, what do you have to do next? Where are you going now? Don't you have a bunch of paperwork to do? Did you get these things done? So you can have a mismatch there as well, because those would all be thinking, and they wouldn't be acknowledging that person's reality which is that they were having a lot of really intense good feelings. Next slide. So holding is something you all probably do, but we want to try to do this with intention. And this is taking in a feeling, having the emotional resonance and experiencing it, but without acting. So it's true listening and acceptance with no effort to change, which is oh so hard. Just listening and accepting and holding feelings is often expressed with our face, our tone of voice, a shared sense of experience that you aren't verbalizing necessarily, or just a few words. So holding is things like leaning in when you're talking to people or nodding your head. And we really want to be conscious of this and not be, if we're in our head thinking, and this is what I'm going to say next, and going through, and this is how I'm going to help them fix their problem, we're not holding feelings. So it's really being completely and totally present. And I find this is one of the things that is really difficult when we're disconnected and not next to each other. Many of you probably have been in a room with someone that has said very few things, but you knew that they can handle the feelings that you were talking about. That's holding. Next slide. Validating feelings, we often do this in combination with holding. And there's just some examples up there. That must have been so hard. I can hear this is overwhelming. What an exhausting situation. It's accepting the emotional reality and putting it into words, or often using their words. And then letting that sink in. You have to soak it up for a minute and then reflecting back what that feeling is, instead of having this tendency to fix it. So validating feelings is not saying, that must have been so hard. If it were me, I would have done this. What an exhausting situation. I bet you could use a break right now. Let's go do this. So validating feelings is not that. Validating feelings is really honoring someone's emotional experience and then just being there with them. So you might have to use your mindful self-regulation. You notice how it almost sounds like you're popping back and forth between these two kind of core processes, but you might have to, I do have to use my mindful self-regulation all the time, because I want to follow up with 10 questions after I validate someone's feelings, and that's not what they need. They need me to be there and be present and validate. Next slide. And really use this power of the pause. So really being lean of speech and offering simple language. This pause gives the space for the other to connect to him or herself and allows for that integration and absorption. It is difficult. So it's been difficult for me to pause on here sometimes when we're talking, and I have a tendency to talk really fast. So I've been trying to slow down my speech. And it's been difficult for me to give you a couple minutes to type in the chat box. So I've got to use my mindful self-regulation often to remind me that I just asked you to do something vulnerable, which is type your ideas or whatever I'm asking you to type in there, and then just use a pause to allow that to happen. So oftentimes we hold, if people need more, we validate those feelings, or we might be doing them at the same time, and then offer a pause, and we let the person lead here and watch how they respond. So you will know whether or not you got it right by reading their cues. Do they need to stay in empathic inquiry? Oftentimes after a validation, people will be able to move on and they're ready to think, and they'll let you know that. Next slide. This is one of the hardest things about validating. Validating isn't agreeing. So there are times where people will say things that you do not agree with, but that is their reality. And you might have to use those MSR strategies. So just to give you a non-clinical example or non-supervisee, I have 3 teenage daughters. So there's a lot of feelings in our house at all times. And sometimes when I'm having a day, like I'm getting ready to do this webinar or what have you, or from my old job when I come home from being in court all day long, the things that they want to tell me about and that they think are important are hard for me to validate. You know, my life is over because so-and-so doesn't like me. And I'm thinking that's really not that big of a problem. There's all these other problems because I was working in child welfare. Your supervisees might say things and you think this isn't a problem if you would just do your paperwork. So you will have those thoughts go through your mind, but thinking about what are some things that you might be able to say that validate but don't necessarily agree. Do you have some ideas that you can share in the chat box? I used to say oftentimes, that seems really complex. Or it seems like you have a lot of feelings about that. It sounds like this is very important to you. That's a great one. It seems like it really bothered you. Good also. So you don't have to agree with the feelings. You don't have to agree with the statement, But that is that person's felt experience. That's where they're at. And the FAN and empathic inquiry really are about, I'm going to check my stuff and get myself calm so I can meet people and see them where they're really at. I hear you, simple one. I love that. Yeah, what I'm hearing is, thanks for sharing that feeling with me. So having those kind of go-to, because there are going to be a lot of times that people, you know, it's lovely when you can have that moment of connection and you can really validate it. And then there are other times where you're going to have to use that mindful self-regulation. And that it's okay if you don't get it exactly right. My boyfriend and I were having a discussion. He was really stressed one time when he came home, and I said, you just feel so overwhelmed right now. And he said, I'm not overwhelmed. I just feel like I have too many things going on, which prompted me to use my mindful self-regulation, because I thought that's the exact same thing. And I had a moment there where I had to choose, do I want to react and, get into it and be right? Or did I want to respond and use my mindful self-regulation and say, that's right, you do. You have so many things going on right now. That's validation. Okay, next slide. So sometimes validation isn't enough, and we need to explore those feelings. And this is usually where non-clinicians get a little scared, because this feels like therapy, but it's not. This is really just asking some questions so that you can understand the reality of your supervisee or your colleague or your friend. And the simplest way to explore feelings really is the power of that pause. Oftentimes you don't have to say anything else after you validate someone's feelings. Oftentimes I'll say, that is really hard. That story you just told me is really difficult. It brought up a lot of pain for you. And if I pause, they will often tell me more. Sometimes you can tell that there's more and they're giving you a cue that they want to keep talking about it. And so you can ask some questions to explore those feelings. Because if you don't and you jump right over into the thinking, people are going to, they'll shove you back into feelings. You will start to say, well, let's talk about some things that we can do. And then they start complaining about everything that you come up with. Or they get even more emotional and let you know that you don't understand them. So you will have miscues like that. You will have times where there's a rupture. And there's always, remember, that time for repair, where you can say, I jumped ahead of you just a little bit, and you were telling me how you felt about that. And I just started, thinking about solutions. But tell me a little bit more about what that was like for you. I'm wondering how that felt. You can, alternatively, there may be people who struggle with the word feelings, or people who struggle with using the word feelings. So think about the context of your situation and your supervision. Since most of I did consultation for a lot of lawyers, judges, and law students. So oftentimes when I would say, what do you think about that? When they were in empathic inquiry, they would tell me how they felt about that. And that's okay if you need to alter that language, because what I learned over time when I was working with them is that the word feelings was really something that caused anxiety in them, and then they were not able to feel safe in that space. So you can alter those questions a little bit. You might need to be using a lot of your mindful self-regulation at this point, because it might feel intrusive, or you worry that you might be, asking too much. And again, this is about reading those cues. People will let you know if it's too much, and then you have that opportunity to get back and recalibrate and get back in alignment. Seems like that was too much for you. Maybe we can talk about this later. Or if you're ready, we can move on to some solutions, which is our next, it's bridging. So, all right, next slide. So if you have done all of these things, and this is the big if, because a lot of times people want to skip right to containing. And I saw someone asked a question about supervisees who are over the top. And there are people that they have big feelings all the time, and you see them coming down the hall to your office, or you see their number pop up, and you have like a visceral reaction to this. First, you need some MSR, and you might need a lot of it. You might need some of your own consultation around that person, because there are people that they really push our button for some reason. So when we talk about containing feelings, this is assuming that you're calm. This is assuming that you have held, validated, and explored those feelings. And these people are just needing a little bit more. So containment is a strategy that we can try if we've done all of these things. You cannot bargain or force people out of their feelings. So any of you that work with small children or have small children and they've been having a temper tantrum and you try to bargain them out of it or force them out of it in some way, it never really ends well. And it doesn't change a whole lot as we get older. We get more socially acceptable about how we manage and express our feelings maybe, but a lot of us still have a hard time with containment and that self-regulation. So containment is a way that you can acknowledge feelings and then test out whether or not they're really ready to move into thinking. It's helping others be comfortable and not overwhelmed in their own state. Next slide. So containing feelings helps. These are kind of some of the cues that containment might be a place where you could go. So containment is if you've spent time really hearing and validating the other person's experience. And you don't have all day often in these interactions or supervisions, or in your discussions with a colleague. But if you've really spent that time and you're needing to move forward, containment might be helpful. If their feelings start to lessen just a little bit, sometimes people are coming in hot and if you start to see them, it's the equivalent when you're working with young kids when they take a breath, to be able to find that moment where those feelings are lessening even just a tiny bit. If people seem stuck, and I'm sure that there are many of you who've had supervisees or friends or colleagues who are telling you the same thing over and over and over again. And sometimes it's without much affect that you can see, but they're just stuck in the same place and they don't seem to be able to move forward. And you've done that time, you have validated and you've explored with them what's going on, but they just aren't able to move forward. Or if the feelings or the emotional intensity are more than you can provide at that time, or maybe provide at all, containment might be a strategy. This again is assuming that you are calm. Sometimes by the time we get to containment, we again are going to need to use our mindful self-regulation because we might feel exasperated by our attempts to help this person or feel kind of helpless to help move them forward, or we might be under pressure for time. So just knowing, I had one group of attorneys that we spent probably the first 12 consultation sessions all in feelings. And this was a group of people who told me they didn't have any feelings, but they had a lot of feelings. And so it could be a moment of a visit, or it could be several times that you're meeting with someone that they are in empathic inquiry, but that's where they're at. And knowing where they're at and trying to meet them there helps us move forward. Next slide. So containment is acknowledging. So again, it's that validation, and then inviting them to move over to thinking, and if necessary, being firm about that line. Go ahead to the next slide. So if we look at it on the fan, it looks a little bit like this. So they've got kind of one foot in feelings and you want to kind of test it out and see if you can get one foot in thinking. And they might be going back and forth again, because the fan isn't linear. So people might start thinking about a problem, and that might bring up some feelings for them. They might be kind of going back and forth. But really, this is where you're acknowledging the feelings and providing them an invitation to think. So I hear how hard this has been for you. We've been talking about this and how much you want to change the way things are going here at work. I'm wondering if we're at a place where we might be able to think together about what would help. So there's an acknowledgement, and then there's this invitation to think. Let's go to the next slide, and there's a few examples. I think you're going to have to fly them all in. So I did these in a way that you could see the two parts, where we have that acknowledgement, and then we have an invitation to think. So you might have supervisees coming in that feel like none of this is getting better, our clients are suffering, they're kind of stuck, and it seems unproductive, and you're having this conversation over and over again, and you might have 10 people that you need to do supervision with that day or other things, and you've tried to validate, and you've held their feelings as best as you could and explored them, but really you're at a point where you're going to do some containment. So the acknowledgement would be, you have huge feelings about this. At this point, we need to move on to how to hold these while we support the needs of your kids. Or your clients on your caseload. So there's an invitation to think, but this one also is kind of holds the line. You aren't giving them a whole lot of choice about whether or not they're going to move. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to move out of their feelings. You're providing the best opportunity for them, and hopefully this is a strategy that can help them contain a little bit and move on. They might not be ready, and they might still be in empathic inquiry. Noticing that, using your own mindful self-regulation, trying those strategies again, and then coming back to containment. The second one, you might have someone who's talking about being overwhelmed. They just don't feel like they can do anything with the virus going on. The impact of COVID on our clients is unpredictable and hard. There's nothing more we can do today. Let's plan to talk about this again tomorrow. There are times where you're going to have to end supervision or conversations because you need to be there for your family, or you need to be there for your other work responsibilities. But this kind of containment really lets people know that they're heard, and the plan is that you can revisit it tomorrow because there's still an empathic inquiry and they're not going to be able to move. So you're offering a little bit of room for them to think about it later on, and hopefully they'll be able to regulate a little bit on their own. And then the third example is just a classic example of this kind of bridging where you acknowledge and invite. I appreciate you taking the time to explain how upset you are, which I think is somebody else put that in the chat box as one of their, if you don't agree with the validation. I wonder if you might be willing to move into talking about next steps and meeting the goals on your case plan. So this might be a conversation you're having with a client in this example. But containment is really using those three kind of steps where you're acknowledging, you're inviting them to think, and if necessary, you're holding that line. Next slide. So I feel always when I do, even when I do this training in 2 days, 6 months of mentoring and another full day, it feels like I have just been pelleting you with information, some of which you probably already know, some of which you might hopefully try with new enthusiasm or trying a different combination. But you won't do this perfectly every time. I've been using the fan for many, many years. I don't always react this way to people in my life. Sometimes I'm dysregulated. Sometimes, a lot of times, I try and fix things when I really should be listening. So remember also with yourself to be mindful unattuned and that this is a practice. We have to give ourselves some self-compassion. We're taking care of a lot of people and a lot of people who have very heavy loads, and we can't give away what we don't have. So hopefully we learned some new tools or some tweaks on some new tools. And now it's really about practicing and being gentle with yourselves, what you have to offer to other people. Next slide. So if we were doing the whole FAN training, there is a way that we structure conversations. And one of the things we always try to do is end without abruption and help people get to a place of reflection. So one of the things I would like to take just a couple minutes to do is for you to reflect upon all of the things that we have, well, you've had to listen all day long. Much prefer when this can be interactive, but with so many of us, that's just not truly possible. But all the things that you've been thinking about as this has been going on today, and you've been great about holding your attention for so long. And type in the chat box, what is one thing you will take from today and possibly try? It could be just one thing you're going to take with you today, a new insight that you had, or something that you might try out. Stop giving the answers and diffuse the emotion. Yep. Pause. Oh my gosh, I need to remind myself. I'm really going to remind myself of all these things. Refrain from offering solutions when people are in their feelings. Take a break, take a moment, validate feelings. Tap the brakes, pause. I like the tap the brakes. Having one foot in feelings. Ways to regulate ourselves. Remembering to meditate more. Be more empathetic, go slower. That I'm the chatty Kathy who drives my supervisor crazy. So someone's having their own insight. Breathe, take a break. You know, and I'm reflecting as when I'm looking at all of these are all probably really simple things that you all know. It's just really hard to do some of these things. So being compassionate with yourself as you try this. A little hint for those of you that are supervisors, this is something you can ask your supervisees at the end too. You know, we've talked about a whole lot of things today. You've shared a lot of things with me. I have given you some suggestions, and I'm wondering, what are you taking with you from today? You can also ask things like, what are 3 words that you would use to describe our time today? My 3 words for today are gratitude. I'm so grateful that I got to share this with you. I love training the FAN. It's changed so many things about how I relate to people in consultation and supervision, and just see things in a different way. And I'm also grateful for the connection. Even though I couldn't hear you, I'm thankful so much for you guys sharing in the chat box. I didn't know how this was going to go, if there were going to be crickets. So I'm thankful for that because I don't feel quite so alone presenting to all of you. And we have a little bit more housekeeping, so I'm going to turn it back over to Beth for a couple minutes. Contact information. So my email is on here. If you had a question, I saw there were 2 questions, or 1 question about, this is recorded and it will be available. If you have questions about FAN training and you want to do the whole FAN training, let me know and I can put you in touch with the Erickson Institute. They're fantastic, Linda and Tori and her team. But if you have other questions that didn't get answered, or if it was like too vulnerable to put it in the chat box, feel free to email me. And now I will turn it over for the next steps.
Thank you, Jenny. Just a quick mention that following this webinar, there will be a post-webinar survey that will be emailed to all participants. If you could please take the time to complete the survey and offer us any feedback or suggestions you may have. to support future development efforts, that would be greatly appreciated. And as we work to identify content topics for future webinars, we welcome any suggestions and recommendations that you may have. And if you could please email those to the email on the screen, which is ovc-tpa@jbsinternational.com. And a reminder, if you are interested in CEUs, please email that same email address, ovc-tpa@jbsinternational.com, and just give us your name and email address. So that is about it, and thank you very much for participating in today's webinar.
Thanks all for joining us. We did get done a few minutes early. I think there don't seem to be too many questions. I just really appreciated this time to feel connected to the work again. So use your 10 minutes to go take a walk or do something that helps you regulate today. Thank you so much. And thanks for your kind words. It's nice to see those on the chat box too.